I bid you welcome.
I welcome you to my house.
Welcome to my house.
Welcome to my home.
Hello horror hounds, welcome to my horror house. For the next set of videos, 3 at least, I want to look at the Poltergeist movies. Not sure if I'm going to touch the remake, but we will of course start with Poltergeist from 1982. The story of an American suburban family who are beset by supernatural entities who eventually abduct Carol Ann, their youngest daughter, and the efforts they go to get her back. I know a lot of speculation and column inches have been dedicated towards whether Tobe Hooper actually directed this film as credited or whether it was Steven Spielberg who directed it in secret. I'm really not interested in any of that. I'm not really going to touch on it. It's quite clear from watching the film that there was a very strong collaboration between the two. There are elements that are very Spielbergian, but there are also elements that are very much clearly the work of Tobe Hooper. And I actually think Hooper's involvement runs a lot deeper than an awful lot of people give him credit for. I actually think that Poltergeist is a sister movie to Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I'll be discussing the whys and wherefores of that towards the end of the video. Poltergeist starts with a really bold opening, one of the boldest statements of intent I've seen in any movie. A black screen and the Star-Spangled Banner playing over that blank canvas, a real declaration that what we're about to see, ladies and gentlemen, this is America. And from the director who gave us a very acerbic view of the state of America in 1974 with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, well, we rejoin him some 8 years later for his next sort of, as it were, cinematic State of the Union address. We get a wonderfully economic introduction to the house and the family as we follow the family dog at night, roaming the corridors, popping into the children's rooms, all the different bedrooms, trying to find snacks and bits of leftover food to eat, exactly as a dog would. And almost instantly, even before any of the human characters have woken up, we're with that family and they feel like a real family. What happens after that with script and performance only cements that throughout the entire rest of the film. It's worth taking a moment to note the phenomenal set dressing that's gone on in this house, especially the children's bedrooms. As a child of the 80s myself, I can look at the young boy's bedroom and go, yeah, that's exactly right. All the posters, all the little figures, all the toys mismatched from lots of different franchises. It looks like a real lived-in children's bedroom. This family does feel like mum, dad, 3 kids, dog, mortgage to pay. And the kids aren't annoying. I liked all of these kids and I believed them all at the different ages they were supposed to be. And I really believed Jo Beth Williams and Craig T. Nelson as mum and dad. So if you're a kid watching the film, you can maybe identify with one of the kids. If you're a grown-up watching the film, I think you identify somewhat with the grown-ups, especially the little after-hours sneak behind the parenting curtain when they're both still up and sharing a joint after another day's work and parenting is done. And then the supernatural shenanigans start, and it's all fun and games until someone gets hurt. And once the spooks snatch Carol Ann, once that little girl disappears, Poltergeist pays a huge debt to the Twilight Zone episode Little Girl Lost, where a girl disappears into another dimension, but they can still talk to her, she can still communicate with them, and they set around trying to find out where's the weak spot in the house to get her back from. And so in Poltergeist, the disappeared Carol Ann can still communicate to them through the television set. And once the team of paranormal investigators are brought in to try and help, Poltergeist pays forwards and acts as inspiration, huge inspiration, for the Insidious movies. Poltergeist is one of those films, like Gremlins, which again had that Spielberg with a connection with his producer's hat on. It's one of those films from that time that were really pushing the PG envelope. It was going to be given an R rating, and Spielberg and Hooper managed to argue it down to a PG. But these were the films of the time that were really creating the space, for better or for worse, for what would become PG-13 certificate movies. The film acts as a real showcase for special effects and optical effects, and I think it's fair to say some of those effects have dated horribly, but others remain fantastically effective, eliciting a sort of, oh my god, how did they do that? I think specifically the implosion of the house at the end of the movie. Fantastically spectacular. And that single take gag with the stools in the kitchen eating area rearranging themselves when the mum's back is turned is a more economical and better executed sort of spooky haunting gag than anything you will see in any of the Paranormal Activity movies. One of the things that helps guide us along this fantastical journey, I think, is a series of remarkably easygoing performances. The kids all seem relaxed. The mum and the dad all seem relaxed in their parts and in their performances. And I think the grounded nature of Jo Beth Williams as mum and Craig T. Nelson as dad does sort of allow some of the other supporting actors to go further out there, to push to the extremes. I'm thinking, of course, of Zelda Rubinstein as the psychic Tangina. I mean, her performance is way out there, and it wouldn't work without the grounding of the main cast. But honestly, who amongst us has never done a spot of tidying up or vacuuming and at the end of the chores gone, this house is clean? But lurking beneath the surface of this dark Disney ride of a movie beats an angry political heart. And this is where I think Poltergeist becomes inextricably related to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You can find many, many articles and investigations of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre which link it inextricably with the time it's made. I read an article that called it the most important Vietnam movie ever made. That the links between Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Vietnam are hard to argue against. The film was made at the time where the Vietnam War was still going on, a huge job crisis, the crisis of the Nixon presidency, and it is a very angry shout into the void about the state of America at the time. Poltergeist has moved past that. Vietnam is now over. Our main adult couple in the film were kids of the Love generation. She still smokes weed and reminisces about the past, and her mind is still open to some of those new agey, hippy-dippy possibilities. She even says to her husband at one point, reach back into our past when you used to have an open mind. Because he is now fully invested in the present of the Reagan dream while she's smoking her weed, and he's partaking himself. He's reading a biography of Ronald Reagan. This is a film about 60s kids who become 80s adults and all that that's built upon. And that metaphor of building on the past is made explicit and literal in a film which is set at the very heart of a new suburban development which Craig T. Nelson's character is actually selling realty for. And in the final revelation of the film, which I won't give away, we find how the new, the bright, shiny America is something that has been built over the bulldozed past. It's something we see in microcosm in the middle of the film when Carol Ann finds her canary has died. She buries it in a very touching little childish ceremony in the back garden. And not much later in the film, that little cigar box coffin is bulldozed up with the rest of the back lawn to make way for the nice swimming pool that's going to be put there that everyone's looking forward to. This is progress. This is the American dream. But the ever-present television in most of the rooms, remember the television acts as the portal through which the supernatural in their dimension can reach our dimension. acts almost as the memory of America and perhaps even the conscience of America to some extent. Now, it would be a stretch and it would be wrong to say that every time a TV is on in Poltergeist, the images we see there relate to war and conflict, but probably about 80% of the time, those are the images we see. At the start of the movie, the first images we get are the shutdown montage of the TV station that's been left on. We see statues from Washington, D.C., I believe the raising of the flag in Iwo Jima, Abraham Lincoln sat there on his chair, that huge statue of him, which can only but call to mind the American Civil War. Later on in the film, in the background, there is a Spencer Tracy film playing called A Guy Named Joe, which is about a dead guy who comes back to act as a sort of guardian guide for a living man. And of course, so there's the supernatural connection there with what's going on in the film in Poltergeist, but he's very specifically a World War II pilot who has come back to be the guardian angel of another US Air Force pilot. So he's there in all his army gear when we see him. Up at the hilltop cemetery where Nelson and his boss are discussing the next phase of expansion for the suburb, and they're talking about moving the cemetery and moving the bodies from here and putting them a few miles down the road so they can develop this new area of land. His boss actually says, it's not ancient tribal burial land, it's just people. So even in that moment, Poltergeist just taps you on the shoulder and reminds you about the indigenous peoples and what happened to them and how they were moved off their land so the colonists could develop someone else's land. And strangely, there's no mention of Vietnam. It's conspicuous in its absence, and almost by being absent, but reminded about other instances in the country's past of armed conflict. It's sort of there as a banquo at the banquet, the uninvited guests. Vietnam seems to be the link in the chain, the unnamed spectre that haunts Poltergeist like it haunted the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But Poltergeist goes further than Texas Chainsaw Massacre did and links the instance of Vietnam in with a wider past of a still young and at this point vibrant, youthful, optimistic, for some, forward-looking country. And Tobe Hooper still seems to be saying, this past has to be addressed, otherwise it comes back and it bites us on the ass. These aren't all equivalents, but they are all instances of the country's past of armed conflict that is just continually bubbling and seething away under there. And quite literally, at the end of the film, bodies from the past burst back up into the present. You don't have to look for the politics in Poltergeist if you don't want to. It's a fun roller coaster ride with supernatural special effects, and it does exactly that kind of Spielbergian job if you just want it for that. If you want a little bit of marrow in the bone, I'd say that there's still enough subtext of the political activist, angry young man who made the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in that mix within Poltergeist if you want to go for it. So next up, we're going to be looking at Poltergeist 2 and then Poltergeist 3 for definite. And maybe I'm absolutely undecided whether I want to watch the remake again. Let me know if you want me to do all four or if you just want me to stick to the first three. And if enough of you want me to talk about the remake, I'll see if I can squeeze it in as well.